Well, David, I'm going to move just a little bit so that sun's not so annoying. Welcome. We certainly have lucked out with a beautiful day today. And want to thank, where'd he go?
He's behind you.
Jim Thomas, where are you? Oh, wait a minute, he's hiding. We want to thank Jim Thomas and Marie for being such good hosts this morning, and for Scott Marshall for allowing for this historic event on his newly found land. Before we officially begin, thanking you all for coming, I'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to another group of people who were on this land before our dedicated person came here. This site was one of the first white settlements in Old Wolcott, in this northeastern corner of what would some 21 years later become Wayne County. Prior to this first white and black settlement in Huron, the Cayuga Nation of the Haudenosaunee, known as Gogoyan, or People of the Great Swamp, came from Cayuga Lake to the north to the shores of Sodus Bay, East Bay, Port Bay, Little Sodus Bay, and Lake Ontario, to hunt, fish, and gather food from the waters and great forests of this region. Evidence of their presence has been discovered in the fields, shores, and woodlands of this region. Let us not forget the wonders and beauties of the land and waters the Gogoyan have left us. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Phil Eygnor, our Huron Supervisor, who is going to share some information from the Pomeroy Foundation with you. Phil?
Morning, everyone. It's good to be here. It's a beautiful day. On behalf of the Pomeroy Foundation, we send our greetings from Syracuse as you dedicate this historic marker, commemorating abolitionist, author of Entrepreneur Austin Steward. We wish we could be with you for this special occasion. At the Pomeroy Foundation, one of our main initiatives is to help people celebrate the community's history. Since 2006, when my father, Bill Pomeroy, established our very first marker program, we have awarded nearly 2,000 grants for roadside markers, plaques nationwide. We feel strongly that markers help educate the public, encourage pride of place, promote historic tourism, and preserve history. Huron is part of a select group of locations from across the United States who are able to tell their community's history with Pomeroy Foundation funded roadside markers. Pomeroy markers are well researched with primary sources reviewed by professional historians. That is what sets your marker apart and makes it the gold standard of historic markers. The marker you dedicate today is part of our New York State Historic Marker Grant Program. In the Empire State, we are also offer marker grant programs ranging from legends and lure and a National Register of Historic Places to our new food history program called Hunger for History. You can learn more about applying for a Pomeroy Foundation marker grant on our website, www.gpfoundation.com. For your efforts to commemorate Stewart's life and legacy, we commend you and extend our appreciation to the town of Huron and all those involved with obtaining this marker. We know it will stand as a testament to your community's history of generations to come. From all of our dedicated staff and trustees at the Pomeroy Foundation, congratulations. Warm regards, Huron Pomeroy, Trustee William G. Pomeroy Foundation.
There's another man who I've want to pay tribute to at this point before we talk about Austin very much. About almost 4 years ago now, in February of 2019, Tom Lightfoot and Rosa Fox went to a ceremony in Canandaigua that Chester Freeman presented. Chester is truly Austin Steward's biographer. At that time in February, Canandaigua was celebrating the 150th anniversary of Austin Steward's death. And Chester wanted to have a memorial to Austin, and so he came up with money to have a very nice plaque, which there's a picture of it over on the table with the refreshments. A very nice plaque created that was placed in the Canandaigua West Avenue Cemetery. It was through that program that Chester presented that I thought, Huron needs a historic marker commemorating Austin Steward because he is indeed a very special man, as is Chester. Chester, unfortunately, he moved south to Florida for health reasons, and he is doing very well in Florida. His health has improved. He's very excited about this historic marker being sent in. He sent me a letter to share with you folks in regard to this. Although I cannot be with you in person, know that I am with you in spirit on this day, this special day. It is unfortunate that Austin Steward's name rarely appears in America or even in Black history books. He is just one of the many unsung heroes whose significant contributions have largely gone unrecognized. Today, you are helping to right that wrong. This historic marker will honor a life well lived and give Austin Steward the recognition he so richly deserves. I had never heard of this book until a friend gave me a first edition of his book, first published in 1857. It has been passed down in her family for generations by her Quaker ancestors. This book makes a significant contribution not only to Black history, but also to the local history of your community. After reading it, I felt literally compelled to honor Austin Steward in some way. I wrote a proposal to the Ontario County Historical Society suggesting an historic marker be placed on Steward's grave in Canandaigua. It was an auspicious time because it coincided not only with the 400th anniversary of the arrival of African slaves in North America, but also with the 150th anniversary of Austin Steward's death. The sun is blinding me. Yeah. The proposal was enthusiastically received, but no funds were available through the Historical Society. So strongly did I feel that this good man deserved to be honored that I donated the marker myself. As you mark this occasion, remember Austin Steward as a baby boy, born into slavery in Virginia and then brought as a young boy to the Finger Lakes region. Recall his escapes from his master and the hard life he lived. Realize that after the Civil War, he became the owner of the first Black grocery store in the city of Rochester, where he had great success. But his greatest contribution was helping to form and lead the Wilberforce colony in Ontario, Canada. At a great personal sacrifice, Steward uprooted his family, closed his business, and used his own personal funds to help establish that colony. Leaving the comforts of Rochester, New York, and moving to the wilderness of Canada took exceptional courage, but he was an exceptional man. Austin Steward calls us to evaluate our priorities and to consider how we demonstrate our humanity. As much as this marker is a reminder of what Steward did, it is also a challenge for us to ask if we would make the same sacrifices he did. His life is an example of integrity and this marker is a representational expression of that call to work toward racial justice in our society. Austin was a man, gentle in nature, compassionate of heart, and steadfast in faith. We are here today as a result of his sacrificing work. May this marker continue to remind us of our commitment to keep on the path of justice. May his life not be in vain. Reverend Chester Freeman. And at this point, I see Earl. Earl, do you want to come have a seat? Come on up front. We have some. Yeah. How you doing, Earl?
Good. Good to see you.
Good seeing you. At this point, we have some distinguished guests. I introduced you to Jim and Marie Thomas and Scott, and Phil delivered our Pomeroy address. We also have, in the back there next to, between Marie and Jim Paprocki, we have the distinguished, you want me to help him that way? Future Senator Brian Mangelo. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything to help your campaign. And I saw Dick Lasher around here. I know there he is. There's Dick, the Rose Town Supervisor. So we've got both Roses around here. And over here to my right is my other husband. There's one husband there, David. He's secure for life. But this one seems to come into play an awful lot lately. Gene Bavis, my colleague in crime with the Bicentennial. So thank you all for coming. I thought it would be a good point to address some of Austin's words and to share with you some of the writings in his book as he described the land that we're on and some of the things that happened here. In chapter 4 of his 22 years a slave, 40 years a free man, Austin talked about journeying to New York State from Virginia and the trek that took place coming here. When they got here, they stayed at a tavern at Soda's Point, yet to be named. Originally it was named Troopville. About a year after he came, the tavern was owned by a Moses and Jabez Sill, who, yes, are early ancestors of the Sills that run the Marine Works up at Soda's Point, but a different branch of the family. So the following accounts the first days of labor and life in this northern wilderness. After Captain Helm had rested a few days at Sodas, he went 6 miles up the bay and purchased a large tract of land lying on both sides of that beautiful sheet of water, and put his slaves on to clear and cultivate it. Then came the tug of war. Neither the overseer nor the slaves had the least knowledge of clearing the land, and that was the first thing to be done. It was useless to consult the captain, for he knew still less about matters of that. To obviate this difficulty, our master bought out a Mr. Cummings, who had some cleared land on the west side of the bay. On this, he put the overseer and a part of the slaves, and then hired a Mr. Harrington to take charge of the remainder. Harrington and his gang of slaves was sent to the east side to chop down the heavy timber and clear the land for cultivation, all of which had first to be learned, for we knew nothing of felling trees, and the poor slaves had a rather hard time of it. Provisions were scarce and could not be procured for cash in that section. There was no corn to be had, and we had but little left. We had no neighbors to assist us in this trying time, and we came near starvation. True, the wild, romantic region in which we abounded in game, elk, deer, bear, panther, and wolves, roamed abroad through the dense forest in great abundance. But the business of the slaves was not hunting or fishing, but clearing the land, preparing to raise crops of grain for the coming season. At last, Captain William chartered a boat and manned it to go to the mouth of the Genesee River to buy corn. They embarked under favorable auspices, but soon there came such a tremendous storm that the boat could no longer be managed, and the crew, in despair, threw themselves on the bottom of the boat to await their inevitable destruction, when one of their number, a colored man with a gun barrel, sprang to the helm, and with great difficulty succeeded in running her safely into a Canadian port, where they were obliged to part with everything in their possession to obtain the means to return to their families in Sodus Bay, who had given them up as lost. But to the great joy of all, they came back at last with their lives, but nothing for the famishing slaves. Before another boat could be sent for our return, we were reduced to the last extremity. We became so weak we could not work, and it was difficult to drag ourselves about, as we were now obliged to do, to gather up all the old bones we could find, break them up fine, and then boil them, which made a sort of broth sufficient barely to sustain life. This we drank and merely existed until at last the long-looked-for boat returned, loaded with provisions, which saved us from starvation and gave us great strength to pursue our labor. In chapter 5, there are several incidents that Steward talks about happening in the area, men getting lost trying to escape slavery, being whipped by their master or their overseer. This one I found particularly interesting because it kind of ties in with something that's happened recently around here. One day, two others and myself thought we saw some animal swimming across the bay. We got a boat and went out to see what it was. After rowing for some time, we came near enough to perceive it was a large bear. Those who watch us from the shore expected to see our boat upset and all on board drowned, but it was not to be. The bear was struck on the nose with a blow that killed him instantly, and he was hauled ashore in great triumph. So, I'm going to ask Jim Wood to come up and share some thoughts with you on Steward's life and connections to today, and then Jim is going to introduce our guest speaker. Jim?
So I brought this hat figuring, well, is the sun going to be this side of the shore? So we have the challenge today. I don't know if how my voice will do. Yours seem to do all right, but for instance, Jim, can you hear me? And Brian, you can hear? All right, so how about Patty? Can you hear? Okay, we're good. Alan, can you hear? All right. I imagine this roadway wasn't here, so I want you all to use your imagination. It's going to be hard to think about what this was really like. So we're going to sort of take you back. I'm going to take you back a little bit more, hopefully, because I'm going to give you an example of how Austin Steward's life is the perfect vehicle for teaching young children many, many important things. Okay? So you'll have to bear with me. I don't know whether you're high school students, college students, or you're 5th or 6th graders. Somewhere in between you can take something away from this life, this exemplary life. And this is important, not just because he was anyone, because he was a black man. And he was a black man who was enslaved in our country. So why is this important? Well, this is very, very important right now because there are many people who don't think we should tell this history. shouldn't tell these truths. We're afraid that by telling these truths about Austin Steward and the discrimination that he faced and the slavery that he was born into and the difficulties that he encountered is somehow damaging to our children. And if you don't think this is real evidence, Earl and I teach a course for teachers, and it's called the Anti-Racism Professional Development Workshop, right here in Wayne County, for Wayne County teachers, and we've been teaching it for the last 5 years. English teacher from Newark, whose name is Danielle Olson. And the interesting thing is, the first 4 years of this course, we had teachers from different places and so on. They loved it. Absolute evaluations were over the top. But this course was attacked all last year in the Soda School District. Yeah. And it was attacked because the feeling was, on this national level, that it was critical race theory, CRT. It was an example of the 1619 Project and all these negative things that people equated to telling the truth about black people and brown people in our country. I want to congratulate the Soda School Board who endured these attacks and said to Earl and I, basically in unanimous form, we're still going to fund this course. You teach it again in 2022, which we did. So that brings me to, well, why is this important? So I want to tell you a little bit, get my phone out, see if I can see that in the sun, see the words I've written, and talk to you about a little bit about how we might go about doing this, about Austin Steward. How would we structure lessons, important lessons, to deliver, to build this wonderful person as an exemplar for children, for students. So bear with me, bring it up here. Okay, so we can kind of think of this as historical truth versus anti-truth. So historians are dedicated to telling the truth. I mean, you can ask Bruce Farrington how hard it is sometimes to get at the truth. You really, really have to work at it. You can't just take it from somebody that this happened or that happened. You have to have evidence, right? Very important. So, for sure, Austin Steward was a victim of the most diabolical order of structural racism, for he was born a slave, and henceforth codified by his skin color as inferior. So that's what he was born into. Federal and New York law enforced that code, so that if you tried to escape, there was a Fugitive Slave Act that bounty hunters could come right up here, right to this very spot, and take you away. And if, let's say, Gene decided to fight on your behalf, he could be fined and imprisoned for doing so. That was the reality of Austin Steward's life. So, but like so many before him, and so many after him, black, brown, and white people resisted this inheritance of slavery. So we know some of those stories. So he resisted basically in 3 ways. First, with his character. We've heard a little bit about that character. We can intuit that from what Rosa said about him. Second, with his pursuit of learning. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. And third, with his willingness to serve others. This was his life. This was his character. Do those sound like characteristics we want to teach our children? I think so. Let's take a look at that character. One thing is clear. Always. We see this trait as his character even during enslavement. Rosa just showed it to us, and the kinds of things he had to overcome. He was resilient. We saw it in his determination. We see it in his resourcefulness and in his courage, his insight. So here are a few examples of that. So, wipe away that house, wipe away all these barns. The bridge isn't here. You're on the east side. How are you going to get to the west side now? You're going to have to swim. You're going to have to do something that's going to cause you to really think through, right? And they had to go all the way to the end of the bay to get a boat to take them anywhere, especially when they were starving. So the important stuff. So every single slave, in addition to their overseer, had to be resourceful, had to be resilient. Resiliency. Do we want to teach our children resiliency? Sure we do. Meaning of overcoming conditions that make us uncomfortable. Is that important? Sure, he imagined a new life that he would eventually win through guile and courage. So he knows his determination. In fact, we find he was not the only one with intelligence and resourcefulness. It was something he shared with his enslaved comrades, which is illustrated by the story that Rosa told about the one slave that rose up and got that boat to Canada. Important stuff. So, I'm going to skip a whole story here that I was going to tell that Rosa already told. That's quite all right. You told me very well.
Oh, it's his words.
Yes, it was his words. Okay. So he and his fellow slaves found a way to prevent starvation. They thrived. Okay. And of course, we don't make this up. We're not just making this up about Austin Steward. He gives us his words. And those words, if you look at his book, 20 Years a Slave, 40 Years a Free Man, there's a lot of documentation in there too. He has letters, original sources. It's what we call primary document. It's very important when we're teaching students. And in the 5th grade curriculum, students are taught how to reference primary documents with points, part of our standards. So as a teacher, I tell the truth, and we teach our students to do historically accurate research by using those primary documents. They can fact check this story just like you can by reading the book. And by the way, the book is online still. You can buy the book, but you can go online and read the entire book. The University of North Carolina Press has this thing called Southern Documents or something like that, so you can access it. But I was just checking it last night. Make sure I remember I get these stories. So, Stewart's intelligence was brought out in his escape to freedom, because this was not a simple matter. New York State had passed an abolition law in 1813. Some of you might not know this, but to protect the enslavers, they didn't put it into operation. They phased it in over many years. It's supposed to be close to 20 years from its conception in like 1799 or 1800 all the way to like the 1820s. So he did his research and he found out, well, how can I get free now? I want to get free now. And the manumission expert that he consulted said, you're not going to be able to. You're going to have to wait. Now, here's somebody that's been told, you're going to be free, but you ain't free now. He's a smart guy, right? And he's thinking, I'm not going to do that. So in 1814, he flees. And he successfully flees. Now, this is starting to happen. I would imagine, I don't know a lot of the research around that about how many people, like when they were told, no, sit tight. You got to work as a slave for another 10 years and then you'll be slave. You'll be freed. And so Captain Helm was starting to have some financial difficulties. So many years later, when a lot of the slaves were kind of gone, he decided, how can I make some money? Well, I know what I could probably do. If I could kidnap those slaves, I could sell them south, because slavery is still legal in several southern states. And so he invited those slaves to a gathering that he said was going to be a reunion. Ever resourceful, Austin goes, this doesn't sound right. I'm not going to do that. But several former slaves did, including his father. And when Helms attempted to kidnap them, there was a fight that broke out, naturally. And in fact, Austin Steward's father lost his life. So you would think, a lot of reasons to be bitter, right? To be paralyzed. But not Austin Stewart. He had taught himself to read, but he had just moderate literacy skills. Really great level. He's now free. He's got to use what little education he's got. What does he do? Well, he pursues education. The second thing that's really part of his is who he was. And he enters in classes that popped up with young people. Now, you're not a young person anymore. He doesn't let that bother him. He generates more skills by educating himself and taking classes, and he starts those businesses that Rosa talked about. First in Canandaigua and then in Rochester. But then that gets to the third thing about him that's so valuable to communicate to kids. We've got, first of all, his character. We've got, second of all, this wonderful pursuit of education that we want to instill in our children. And the third thing is he serves others. So as Rosa says, what's he do? He's a successful businessman. And does he look to accumulate wealth? No, he sees around him slaves that are still trying to get free. So he joins the Underground Railroad. He becomes an abolitionist. He speaks out. Then he goes to the next step and he says, you know what? I'm helping people here get to Canada, but then when they get to Canada, what then? So he goes to Canada. In the Wilberforce colony, he gets there in like 1830, and there's been slave codes or anti-black codes set in motion in Ohio. There's a big riot against that in Cincinnati, and a lot of black folks have pushed young and escaped to Canada to this Wilberforce colony. Austin Stewart gets there as sort of an educated man, right? So what do you think the first thing's going to happen? He's made president of the colony. So this guy is heroic. I mean, truly heroic. And that's the kind of thing that isn't critical race theory. It's not something against the 1619 project that the New York Times developed a few years ago. This is the essence of what it is. It's people like Austin Stewart and finding out why these former slaves or these fighters for justice are important for our children. So, in closing, see if I can get to the closing because I bounced around to try to give Earl a time to get going here. So he had his character, and we've got added to his character his pursuit of education, and then his passion to serve his fellow humans. Austin Stewart did not run from risk. He did not allow himself the complacency of comfort. He reached out a hand. He risked his hard-earned assets. When he saw slim opportunity for freedom, he ran toward it. He fought for it. When he had nothing, he worked with his black and white neighbors to build that nothing into something. When he saw others who had been shackled by oppression in the same way as he had been, he fought to destroy those shackles. When I hear the teaching the truth of systemic racism and personal racism, that heroic patriots like Austin Stewart dedicated their lives to overcome shames our children, I say, you are wrong. Exposing the history of racism and telling its story is the opposite. We don't own the past. Our ancestors' wrongdoings are not ours to carry. We must learn from the past, not be shamed by it. We must say, I learned the truth. I recognize racism and its impact around me today, but I am better than that. I look at Austin Steward's example of bravery, resilience, compassion, motivation, and human decency in the face of racism, and like Austin, I say, I will forge a better world. So today, I thank Rosa, and actually I thank Brian. Brian and I have had conversations about this. Brian has pledged to not to recognize his value. And I also love this opportunity to have a visible presence for Austin's legacy. When Tom Lightfoot and Rosa were in Canandaigua for Chester's unveiling the 150th anniversary of the bus a plaque. You know, I was there too, and I remember saying to Rosa, Huron, shouldn't we have a marker? Rosa said, yeah, we should have a marker. So now we have a marker. So most of all, I thank Austin Steward. May your spirit uplift everyone who reads this marker and learns about you. May they ponder the gift of your life as a social justice and anti-racist hero and a beacon of moral and physical courage to every student who follows. Earl?
You want to introduce him?
Earl is, so I'm a founding member of the Reaction. President of the and I kind of shared what I was going to say, so I hope I didn't carve out any of what you had to say.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
I think you're going to enjoy what Earl has to say.
Well, thank you.
Earl Greene.
Thank you. I have my voice projects. Can you all hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
All right, good. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a different approach, and because I think Rosa has been covered Austin Stewart's life and how important his life was. So, I want to talk with you about why this is so important. So, first of all, I want to introduce myself, and I'm doing this for a purpose. It's going to go right into what I want to share with you today. So I am Earl Greene. I'm the president of WARE. And aside from that, I am also the full-time pastor of the Church of Christ in Newark, New York. I've been there for 28 years at that church. And 2 years ago, I took over another church in Rochester. So I'm the pastor of two churches. And so it's Sundays become very busy for me. And then I am also a faculty member at the University of Rochester, where I serve as Director of Racial and Social Justice, Family Engagement and Equity at the Children's Institute. A lot of my work is around racism, around anti-racism and social justice, but my background is in mental health, working with children and families. And I've been doing that for close to 40 years. If you talk to my oldest son, he'll say 50 years. He keeps reminding me about how old I am. So in that, I'm also a nationally certified anger management specialist. And I run the anger management program for Wayne and Monroe County. I'm also a New York State certified mediator for the 7th Judicial District of New York State Unified Court System. And I started out in my career as a counselor when I was 19 years old. So it just feels like there was 1,000 years ago all of this stuff happened, and I'm still engaged in a lot of this work. I travel across the country doing talks, talking about cultural humility, talking about racism, talking about issues around children and family, trauma, and ACEs. And I had the opportunity to speak to people from different states, and every February I'm in Washington, D.C. at an international conference where the series of trainings that I do around anti-racism and cultural humility, during the whole series, I just completed part 7 of my series this past February. This coming February, I'm introducing part 8. And this is an international conference of close to 5,000 people attended every year. And every year I'm asked to come back. Now the reason why this is important is because I wanted to highlight my expertise. I wanted to highlight and dispel some of the myths and the stereotypical notions that people have, particularly about black men. And one of the things I noticed when I thought about this talk about Austin Steward, the thing that came out for me is the fact that it's because of him that I'm standing before you today. I tell you all, like I tell the church, you just miss your shout. The reason I'm here today, the reason why I have accomplished so much in my life is because of Austin Steward. It's because of Frederick W. It's because of these great black men and women who paved the path and paved the way for me. There was a time in this country where it would be unheard of for me to be standing before you as a black man, the only black man standing here. Are you all with me? Because there was this false notion that the darker my skin, the less intelligent I am. That is a false notion. As a matter of fact, most people don't know that when you look around your houses, when you go home today, and you pick up that broom or that dustpan, when you turn your heat on, when you turn your television on, when you take out your cell phones, when you take that spatula, if you're making hamburgers today, if you flip a hamburger, keep in mind that almost 100% of the items we use in our homes were invented by black people. Everything. And the reason why we don't know this is because they were never given credit for the innovation, creations, and inventions, and their patents were stolen. That's why our history is so frightening. And that's why when I walk into a establishment, and I experienced this in Wayne County, when I first came out here I think it was in 1995, and I lived in Lyons for 17 years. And after Lyons, I went to Newark, and from Newark, I now live in Farmington. Knowing this history, when I walk through Canandaigua, when I walk through Farmington and Victor, I see the history. I hear about the start of these families. And it had not been for the enslaved people like Austin Steward, we all would not be where we are today. As this false narrative of teaching our history and sharing with our students and with our children the life of Austin Steward, how creative he was, how innovative he was, how determined, and as Jim said, very resourceful and resilient. He sets the example for us not to give up. And because of how I grew up in this country, because when I went to school, I had to work extra hard. I had to do more than my white counterpart. I had to present myself in such a way that people would not have questions. There was a time where I would not, at an event like this, I would not dress like this. I would have a full suit and a tie on. You know why? Because of people's false notions and assumptions. I turned my hat around because of the sun, not because I didn't want to look like a thug. This is the way I came in. But I'm also conscious because my parents and my father, my grandfather trained me to make sure that I present myself in a professional way. And that when I talk with people, they hear me. So as we consider Austin Steward and the life that he lived, how it was because of him that children were educated. It's because of him that black people like him, that black people naturally went into entrepreneurship. And this is in our history. When you think about Black Wall Street, when you think about Mount Bayou, Mississippi, when you think about Rosewood, all of these places where black people thrive, build their own businesses, their own banks, their own hospitals. I mean, and because of that, it angered, at that time, the white people. And angered them so much that they literally burned those places down. It was during the Reconstruction. Thus ushered in Jim Crow. And what we're seeing today is the new Jim Crow. Now, I don't know how many of you know the history of how Jim Crow was ushered into the American life. But it was ushered in because of the hatred of the enslaved people, free black people, educated black people. They feared that something was being stolen from them. And if you don't think we're in the new Jim Crow today, just pay attention to the language. Make America great again. And I want you to really think about that. And when you think about making America great again, and I say this unapologetically, the message really is make America white again. When you think about this notion that something is being stolen for us, let's take our country back, then you have to ask yourself, back from who? Who's taking this country? When you think about the genocide of Native Americans, when you think about the fact that we had a stolen people who came from their motherland to come here to live on stolen property, that's not fair. So in order to make it through, in spite of the racism, the violence, the torture, many black enslaved people committed suicide by jumping off ships. Many people died. There's blood that runs through the soil of our land. Austin Steward understood this because of his own experiences. So, rather than engaging in a struggle, most black people found it necessary to be innovative and creative. It's no surprise that he would educate himself. It's no surprise that he would pass this on and teach others. It's no surprise that he knew how to start up businesses that made Rochester what it is today. It is no surprise. So as Jim talked about this CRT 1619 project, the pushback that he and I experienced because of this course that we're teaching, it does nothing but motivate us. Because we don't have time to argue with people about the reality of racism in this country. We don't have time to argue with people about the history and how important it is for our children. If our children did not know this history, where would they be today? They need to know. They need to know that the hamburger they're eating was flipped by a spatula that was created by a black person. They need to know, our children need to know the reason why they're warm at their homes, the reason why you can turn your heat up this time of the year is because of a black person. The reason why your children have cell phones is because of the black person. The reason why we were able to reach the moon is because of four black scientists, black women. The reason why you're able to turn your television on is because of a black person. I mean, think about that. If we try to keep history away from our children, everything that they experience in this life, everything they experience in their homes, were created by black people. Or do we want to be selective in how we teach history? Let's teach them the good stuff. But they don't need to know that Austin Steward endured such torture, but yet he overcame that. So when I engage in conversation, I'm going to tell you the same story I told when we were in South Butler at another dedication as it relates to racism and the history that we understand. I tend to not engage in argument about CRT. I don't argue with people about the 1619 Project. I don't argue with people about the strength and the value of black people in this country. I see them as those discussions that I call tiger and donkey. Those are tiger-donkey discussions. I don't know how many of you heard the story of the tiger and the donkey. As the story goes, the donkey goes to the tiger and says the grass is blue. The tiger says, no, the grass is green. The donkey says, don't argue me with this. I know the grass is blue. So as the discussion got heated, the donkey says, well, let's take this to the lion. And they went to the lion, and the donkey approaches the lion. He says, Your Highness, he says, will you please tell this tiger that the grass is blue? We all know the grass is blue. And I think you ought to punish him. So the lion says to the donkey, he says, well, Mr. Donkey, if you believe the grass is blue, then the grass is blue. The donkey got happy. Looks at the tiger, I told you the grass was blue. Now, Your Highness, will you please punish this tiger? So the lion looks at the tiger and says, Mr. Tiger, I punish you with 30 days of silence. The tiger was baffled. The donkey was happy and went his way. The tiger approached the lion and he says, Your Highness, he says, why did you punish me? We all know the grass is green. The lion says, Mr. Tiger, I didn't punish you because the grass was green or he said the grass was blue. He says, we already know that. He says, I punish you because you are an intelligent being and you wasted your time arguing with an ass. Now, and this is the reason why I don't have donkey-tiger discussions with people around race. There's no need to argue about that because the history shows it. And I think all of us ought to be very proud of where we are today because of men like Austin Stewart. I think we all need to be very proud of where we live. I mean, think about this. How many people really know the impact of Africa on rural Wayne County? I mean, think about that. You know, when we think about civil rights, when we think about all of the work that has been done over the years, we watch it and we see a lot of cities, right? Urban areas. But how often do we talk about the history when we come to rural places like Ontario County, Wayne County, Seneca County, with all of this history, this rich history, and understanding that during the Underground Railroad that runs through all of these counties. We are living on land that's rich in history. So let me encourage you to talk with your children, talk with your grandchildren. Don't be afraid to be unapologetic in telling the truth. I'll leave you with this one passage. And I'll make it short because, you know, when pastors start referring to scripture, you know, we get kind of happy about what that scripture is saying, and I keep it a little longer than what I need. But I'm just going to share this with you. In Isaiah chapter 59, somewhere around about verse number 14, verse 14. Isaiah describes a time that was very trying to find the right words. It was a devastating time where the people of Israel were oppressed and they were, the whole environment they were in was made to be a place without peace, a place where there was no righteousness, a place where there was no justice. It was a place of no mercy. And Isaiah describes this life and this moment in the life of Israel. So he says that justice, or mercy rather, was turned back. Justice was standing afar off. And then he says, for truth has fallen in the street, and equity could not enter. I stopped by to tell you this morning that whenever truth fails, whenever there's an absence of truth, there can never be peace. Whenever there's an absence of truth, there cannot be justice. When there's an absence of truth, there cannot be righteousness. And where there's an absence of truth, equity is hindered. Thank you.
Thank you, Earl, very much, very much. And Jim, thank you. I think we've all gotten a lot to take with us in our hearts and in our heads as we complete this ceremony today. I know, I really appreciate both of you.
Oh, yes, it is white.
So, Jim Thomas and Marie were kind enough to make copies of Chester Freeman's article that was in the Times of the Finger Lakes a few years ago on Boston Steward. There are a few copies over here for you to take. Jim? Marie, you want to grab the phone from Jim? Jim, you want to come up here? Me? You. Bill, you want to come up here? I think it's time for an unveiling, right?
Yeah.